The most unsettling part wasn't the screaming. It was the sound of the heavy ceramic pot shattering against the floor. It sounded like a bone snapping. Then came the smell, burnt sugar, charred peppers, and something deep and earthy that made everyone in the kitchen stop breathing for a second. Mr. Miller screamed that she was untrained and ruined his $300 sauce. "Pick up your check and never step foot in a professional kitchen again. You'll be lucky if the mall food court takes you," he said. But little did he know, in 6 months, that same untrained girl would be the one deciding if he was worthy enough to wash her dishes. "Get out," Mr. Miller screamed. His face was the color of a raw steak. He was the head chef of the Silver Spoon, the fanciest place in the suburbs. He didn't just cook, he acted like he was performing surgery. "I told you to stir the base, Jordan, not add your little touches. You're a dishwasher. You're untrained. You're nothing but a pair of hands to clean the grease off my tiles." Jordan stood there, her boots soaking in the dark, thick liquid spreading across the white floor. She was 22, her hair pulled back in a tight bun under a cheap cap. She had grown up in the small houses 3 miles over, the kind of place where you learned to stretch a bag of rice for a week. She didn't have a degree from a fancy French school. She had a grandma who taught her that food without soul was just wet cardboard. "Sir," Jordan said, her voice steady, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "The sauce was bitter. The wine you used was turning. I just added some honey and some charred skin from the onions to—" "I don't care if you added gold dust." Mr. Miller stepped into her space, his white apron spotless compared to her stained shirt. "You ruined a $300 reduction. You don't have the pedigree. You don't have the eye. You're a girl from the way who thinks she can play chef. Pick up your check and never step foot in a professional kitchen again. You'll be lucky if the mall food court takes you." The other cooks stayed quiet. They looked at their cutting boards. They knew Jordan was the hardest worker there. She stayed late. She prepped the vegetables perfectly. But in this world, if you didn't have the right name or the right school on your resume, you were invisible. Jordan didn't cry. Not there. She grabbed her backpack from the locker and walked out the back door. The night air was cold. She sat on a plastic crate in the alley, staring at her hands. They were red from the dishwater. She felt a deep, cold weight in her stomach. How was she going to tell her mom? How was she going to pay the rent on their small apartment? She looked down at her boots. A bit of the ruined sauce had splashed onto the leather. Without thinking, she wiped a drop with her finger and tasted it. Her eyes widened. It wasn't a mistake. It was incredible. The bitterness of the wine had vanished, replaced by a deep, smoky sweetness that felt like a warm hug. It was the kind of flavor that made you want to close your eyes and remember every good thing that ever happened to you. Mr. Miller was so blinded by his rules and his ego that he couldn't even taste genius when it was right under his nose. She stood up, a spark of fire lighting up in her chest. He called her untrained. He called her nothing, but she knew something he didn't. She knew how to make people feel something with a spoon and a pot. She walked home, the 3 miles feeling shorter than usual. Her neighborhood was quiet, the streetlights flickering. When she got inside, her mom, Mrs. Mary, was sitting at the kitchen table clipping coupons. "You're home early, baby," Mary said, looking up. She saw Jordan's face and her smile dropped. "What happened?" "I got fired, Mom," Jordan said. Mary sighed, her shoulders sagging. "Oh, Jordan, we really needed that check. What are we going to do?" "I'm going to cook," Jordan said. She went to the pantry and pulled out a 5-pound bag of onions and a small jar of honey. "I'm not going back to the dishes. I'm going to make that sauce. And I'm going to sell it." Sell it where? We don't have a restaurant, honey. We barely have a working stove. I don't need a restaurant, Jordan said, her voice dropping an octave. I just need people to taste it. Once they taste it, the walls won't matter. For the next 3 days, Jordan didn't sleep. She used the last of her savings, $84, to buy spices, cheap cuts of meat, and bags of rice. She practiced, she failed, she burned things. She cried over the sink when the balance wasn't right. But on the 4th day, the smell in the apartment changed. It became heavy, rich, and magnetic. It was the smell of something that shouldn't be possible in a tiny kitchen with a cracked window. Jordan found an old camping stove and a folding table in the basement. She hauled them down to the corner of the busiest street in the neighborhood, right where the city workers and the office people walked to the train station. She didn't have a sign. She didn't have a fancy menu. She just had a giant pot of the mistake, short ribs braised in that smoky honey onion sauce over simple white rice. The first person to stop was a man named Joe. He worked construction and looked tired. "What's that smell, kid?" Joe asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Best thing you'll ever eat," Jordan said. $5 a bowl. Joe looked skeptical. $5 for street food? Better be good. He took a bite. He stopped chewing. He looked at the plastic bowl, then at Jordan, then back at the bowl. He didn't say a word. He just sat down on the curb and finished the whole thing in 2 minutes. "Give me another one," Joe said, his voice hushed. "And one for my boss. He's a mean guy, but this might make him nice for an hour." By noon, Jordan had sold out. By the 2nd day, there was a line of 10 people. By the end of the week, the line was 30 people long, stretching past the barber shop and the pharmacy. People were stepping out of their expensive cars, men in suits standing next to guys in hard hats, all waiting for a plastic bowl of Jordan's cooking. Word was spreading. People were calling it the magic pot. But the real trouble started when a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the curb, and a man with a gold watch stepped out. He wasn't from the neighborhood. He looked like the kind of man who owned the buildings, not the kind who lived in them. Jordan looked up from her pot, her face covered in steam. She didn't know it yet, but her life as a dishwasher was officially over. The man in the gold watch didn't look like he belonged on a cracked sidewalk in front of a laundromat. His name was Robert, and he was the kind of man who decided which restaurants lived and which ones died in the city. He didn't say a word as he stood in the back of the line, checking his phone every 30 seconds. The people around him, nurses and scrubs, mechanics with grease under their fingernails, didn't care who he was. In this line, everyone was equal. Everyone was just hungry. When Robert finally reached the folding table, Jordan was scraping the bottom of her 3rd giant pot. Her arms ached, and her apron was splattered with sauce, but her eyes were bright. $5, Jordan said, not even looking up. "I don't want a $5 bowl," Robert said. His voice was deep and smooth like expensive leather. "I want to know what's in the pot." Jordan looked up then. She saw the suit, the manicured nails, and the black SUV idling at the curb. She didn't flinch. "It's short ribs and rice, sir. Take it or leave it. There are 20 people behind you who want it." Robert took a plastic bowl, sat on a nearby bus bench, and took a bite. He didn't finish it in 2 minutes like Joe, the construction worker. He chewed slowly. He closed his eyes. He stayed like that for a long time, letting the flavors of charred onion, honey, and deep, smoky bone marrow hit every part of his tongue. When he opened his eyes, he walked back to the table. "I've eaten at every Michelin star restaurant from New York to Tokyo," Robert said, leaning in so the others couldn't hear. "And I've never tasted anything with this much soul. Who trained you?" "Nobody," Jordan said, packing up a to-go container for a regular. "The guy who fired me last week said I was untrained, said I didn't have the pedigree." Robert gave a small, dry laugh. "Then that man is a fool. My name is Robert. I own a few buildings downtown. I want you to come with me.
I have a kitchen that's been sitting empty for 6 months because I couldn't find anyone worthy of the stove. I don't have money for rent, Jordan said plainly. You don't pay me rent. You just cook. We split the profits. I handle the wine, the waiters, and the rich folks who think they know about food. You just keep making this sauce. Deal? Jordan looked at her mom, Mary, who was standing by the cooler, wiping her forehead with a napkin. Mary nodded, her eyes wide with hope. Deal, Jordan said. 6 months later, the world had flipped upside down. The kitchen Robert mentioned wasn't just a room, it was a masterpiece of glass and steel on the top floor of a skyscraper. Jordan named it The Source. She didn't change the recipe. She didn't add fancy garnishes or tiny portions that looked like art projects. She served big, heart-shaking bowls of the food she loved. But the price had changed. It wasn't $5 anymore. It was $500. And the people paying it weren't construction workers. They were tech giants, movie stars, and world leaders. The most unsettling part of the success wasn't the money or the fame, it was the silence. At the Silver Spoon, where Jordan used to scrub floors, the kitchen was a war zone of screaming and clattering. At the Source, the dining room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. People were too busy experiencing the food to talk. They sat in velvet chairs, overlooking the city lights, weeping over a bowl of ribs. Jordan became a ghost. She never went out into the dining room. She didn't do interviews. She stayed in the back, her hair in the same tight bun, her hands still red from the heat of the stove. She hired the people from her old neighborhood, the ones who had been told they weren't trained enough for the big leagues. She taught her secrets, not with books, but with feeling. One Tuesday night, Robert walked into the kitchen. He looked worried. "Jordan, we have a problem," Robert said. "Is the meat late?" Jordan asked, not even looking up from a simmering pot. "It's the wait list. It hit 3 years this morning. People are offering me $50,000 under the table just to get a seat for dinner tonight. A prince from overseas just called and asked if he could land a helicopter on the roof just for a tasting." Jordan wiped her hands on her apron. "Tell them to wait. I only have 10 burners. I'm not rushing the sauce for a prince or a billionaire. If they want to eat, they wait like everyone else." "There's someone else," Robert said, shifting his weight. "A man is downstairs. He's been there since 4 a.m. He says he knows you. He says he's the one who gave you your start." Jordan felt a cold ripple go down her spine. She knew exactly who it was. "Is his name Miller?" she asked. "Yes. He looks terrible, Jordan. His restaurant, the Silver Spoon, closed down 2 months ago. Health code violations, debt, and apparently his head chef, some guy he hired to replace you, walked out with all the recipes. He's begging for a job. He said he'd even wash the dishes." Jordan stood still. She remembered the sound of that ceramic pot shattering on the floor. She remembered the smell of the mistake that he called garbage. She remembered walking 3 miles in the cold because she didn't have bus fare. "Tell him to come up," Jordan said. "You're going to hire him?" Robert asked, surprised. Jordan looked at the giant pot of sauce, the one that tycoons were currently lining up for. "I want him to see the kitchen first. I want him to see what untrained looks like." A few minutes later, the elevator doors opened. Mr. Miller stepped out. He wasn't wearing his spotless white apron anymore. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. He looked around the gleaming kitchen, at the high-end equipment, and at the staff of 20 people working in perfect, respectful silence. He saw Jordan standing at the center of it all. She didn't look like a dishwasher anymore. She looked like a queen. "Jordan," he whispered, his voice cracking. I saw you on the news. I didn't know it was you." "You knew it was me, Mr. Miller," Jordan said, her voice calm and cold. "You just didn't think I mattered." "I made a mistake," he said, stepping forward, his hands shaking. "A huge mistake. I'm ruined. I lost everything. Please, I heard you're the best in the world now. Just give me a spot. I'll do anything. I'll prep the onions. I'll scrub the grout. Just don't let me starve." Jordan looked at him for a long beat. The silence in the kitchen stretched out, thick and heavy. Every cook stopped what they were doing to watch. Mr. Miller stood there, trembling. He looked like a ghost haunting his own past. The man who once ruled his kitchen with a scream and a heavy boot was now reduced to a whisper. He looked at Jordan's boots. They were high-quality leather now, but they were still stained with the work of a real cook. "You want to scrub the grout?" Jordan asked, her voice echoing off the stainless steel walls. "You want to prep the onions?" "Anything," Miller pleaded. "I have no one else to turn to. My name is mud in this town. No one will hire a chef whose restaurant went under in a month." Jordan walked over to a small, private table set near the back window of the kitchen. It was the chef's table, the most expensive seat in the entire building. It looked out over the skyline, where the lights of the suburbs twinkled in the distance. "Sit down," Jordan said. Miller blinked, confused. "What?" "Sit down," she repeated. "You told me I didn't have the eye for food. You told me I didn't have the pedigree. Today, you aren't a chef. You aren't a boss. You're just a man who's hungry." She signaled to one of her cooks, a young guy named Marcus, who Jordan had found working at a gas station. Marcus brought over a single, steaming bowl of the short ribs and rice. The aroma hit Miller like a physical weight. It was complex, deep, and filled with the kind of warmth that only comes from someone who knows exactly who they are. Miller took a shaky breath and picked up the spoon. He took a bite. He didn't speak. He didn't move. A single tear rolled down his cheek and fell into the sauce. He realized in that moment that Jordan hadn't just added touches to his sauce back then. She had saved it, and he had been too small of a man to see it. "It's perfect," Miller whispered. "It's better than anything I've ever made in 30 years. "I know," Jordan said. She didn't say it with pride. She said it as a fact. "But here's the thing, Mr. Miller. My kitchen is built on respect. I don't hire people who think they're better than the food. I don't hire people who use their power to break others. You didn't fire me because I was untrained. You fired me because you were scared that a girl from the neighborhood could do in 1 hour what you couldn't do in a lifetime." Miller looked down at the empty bowl. "So, you won't hire me." Jordan leaned against the counter. "I won't hire you as a chef, and I won't hire you to wash dishes, because I treat my dishwashers with dignity, and you haven't earned the right to stand among them yet." She pulled a small card from her pocket and laid it on the table. It was the address of a local soup kitchen, the same one Jordan used to donate her extra pots of rice to when she started on the sidewalk. "Go there," Jordan said. "Tell them I sent you. Work there for 6 months. Feed people who have nothing. Learn that food is about service, not ego. If you can do that without complaining, without acting like you're too good for the hairnet, then come back and see me. Maybe then I'll give you a spot at the bottom of the line." Miller took the card. His hands weren't shaking anymore. They were heavy with shame. He stood up, gave a small, painful nod, and walked toward the elevator. As the doors closed, he saw Jordan turn back to her stove, already forgotten by her. The next morning, the story hit the news, but it wasn't about Miller. The headline read, "The 3-year wait. Why the world's richest men are buying houses in the suburbs just to be near the source." Jordan sat in her office, looking at a photo of her grandma. Her mom, Mary, walked in with a stack of mail. "Jordan, baby," Mary said, laughing, "there's a letter here from the governor. He wants to know if you'll host the state dinner. And there's another one from a guy who says he'll trade you a private jet for your sauce recipe." Jordan didn't even look at the letters. She was watching a young girl through the security camera on the ground floor. The girl was standing on the sidewalk, looking at the menu in the glass case. She looked tired. She had flour on her shirt and a determined look in her eyes. "Mom," Jordan said, standing up, "go down there and bring that girl up here." "The one in the hoodie?" Mary asked. "Yeah," Jordan smiled, picking up her favorite wooden spoon. "I think she's got a mistake she wants to try, and I think it's time we trained the next genius." Jordan realized that being untrained wasn't a curse. It was her greatest strength. It meant she didn't have any rules to break. It meant she could cook the way the world felt, not the way the books told her to. As the sun set over the city, the line for the source began to form downstairs. Tycoons, celebrities, and billionaires stood in the cold, clutching their reservations like lottery tickets. But inside the kitchen, Jordan was just a girl with a pot, a flame, and a soul that no one could ever fire again.